All right, well, welcome everyone to Home Office Hours Live with Vistaprint. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you haven't joined us before, Home Office Hours is a series of live discussions on timely topics. We'll be featuring guest speakers as well as our very own Vistaprint team members. Our goal with the series is to provide you with education and advice for surviving during these COVID-19 times. We know that small business needs have changed, and we wanted to help. So we created the series as a way to connect during the time when we're all spending a lot of time inside and we're dealing with various challenges working from home. We've tapped our colleagues to help answer some of the questions that you're all having as business owners. So today we have with us Rob Crosland, our EU Public Relations Lead here at Vistaprint. Hi, Rob. Thank you for joining us today. And we also have Arti Patel, Account Director at Bliss Integrated Communication, a PR and marketing services agency. Arti, can you say hello?
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Arti. Thank you for joining us today. So today we are going to talk about how small businesses can handle crisis communications. And before we get started, I wanted to share a few housekeeping items. We will be taking questions at the end of the session, but please feel free to submit those throughout the session. You can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we'll also be sending the recording out after we wrap up. And finally, if you are joining us from Facebook Live, your questions will also be submitted via the Zoom Q&A, so we will get to those as well. So let's get started. Rob, we've talked in a number of these webinars about tone, whether that's on different platforms or on your website, but you and Arti deal with all of this from a wider strategic angle. So can you lay out for us, what should a business be doing now with their key messaging?
Absolutely. So we feel that one of the key principles is that you shouldn't stay silent. Many of your customers are likely to be online now more than ever, and they're really looking to hear from the brands and the businesses that they know and love. So you may initially feel a bit lost for words, and that's absolutely fine. But a few key messages to get across now are how you're being impacted by COVID-19, what you're doing to pivot, and if possible, how you're also helping and giving back to your community. So in terms of how you're being impacted, it's best to be really transparent about the impact that COVID-19 is having on your business. And even if the story is not initially a positive one, such as maybe having to temporarily close a store, it's always best to be very upfront about these challenges with your customers. And don't be afraid to ask for help either. We're seeing huge levels of support all over the world for small businesses. So really just let your customers know what they can do to help, whether that's ordering takeaway or buying gift cards that they can use later, or maybe rescheduling rather than canceling appointments. In terms of what you're doing and how you're pivoting, we're also seeing some really inspirational examples across all of our customer base of how businesses are really adapting their offering and pivoting so that they can keep serving their customers. And to give you a few examples, we're seeing businesses offering contact-free delivery, DIY food and drink kits, and also businesses that offer fitness classes and moving these classes that were traditionally in person to online platforms. So definitely make sure you tell your customers what you're doing to pivot during this time so that you can keep serving them. And then finally, another way to show compassion is to really share with your customers how you're giving back during this time and how you're supporting your community. And again, amongst our customers, we've seen some really nice examples of this. In the UK, one of our customers is an artist who started a positive postcard club, and another is a family-run law firm that's really stepping up and providing advice to their clients about any of the government announcements about COVID-19. And we're also seeing many other food and drink businesses offering discounted products to NHS workers. So really, all of these things can help to kind of show compassion and really how you're giving back to the community.
That's great. Thank you, Rob. And I think your point to not stay silent is a really important one. I think that's definitely a temptation when all of us don't necessarily know what to say right now. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Arti, can you add your perspective there from an external agency point of view?
Sure. So I think one thing that as an agency we've had to remind ourselves and everyone else is that a global pandemic response really isn't covered in a basic crisis meeting. When you're talking about Crisis 101, you don't typically think of a worldwide event like this, especially one of this absolutely devastating magnitude. So we try to remind our clients really just to do some basic things, which is one, take a breath. It's okay. We're all in this together, and it's okay if you need a moment to really figure out what you want to say and what you want to do next. No company, large or small, businesses of all sizes can't be everywhere all at once either. So it's an unrealistic burden to put on yourself if you think you can message every customer within 10 minutes of what they need on all platforms. It's okay to pick and choose your moments and your access points. It's also an unrealistic expectation for your customers if they think that you're going to be business as usual during a situation as big as COVID. So take a breath and then pick your spot, and ultimately define the customer pain points as they stand today, and then adjust your plans to enact actions to meet those specific, now augmented requirements as quickly as you can. Most customers likely that you have now are interacting with you in probably a couple of key places. Those are probably the places you want to start when you're trying to message back to them.
That's great. Thank you, Artie. Let's keep going down this road. What about social media? So we keep reiterating here that handling this crisis is happening online. It's happening on social media because that's where your customers are right now. So can you lay out some tactics that you might recommend as an agency for a hypothetical small business?
Sure. So for a hypothetical small or even micro business, I have a feeling that they're experiencing some new things for the very first time. So regardless of what's going on, know that clarity in your messaging is really the key to everything. So no issue that can come up from your customers at this time can really be too minor to ignore. It could have to do with regular issues that have to deal with supply and demand. It could be about delays in deliveries, those kinds of basic things, or it could be something that is wholly new given that we are dealing with some external forces at the moment. So ultimately, define those customer pain points and then just be as transparent as possible with your responses. Be honest, be simple with your messaging, and really clear in the next steps that you're taking to address those particular points. Everyone is a little bit off their access right now, whether you're a nail salon or an Etsy shop or a family-run pizza joint. You've got a lot going on. So if you are a small business and you are trying to stay the course, explain to your customers what your new business normal looks like. If you are pivoting to offer services or volunteer needs that the community that you're in require, then message that, amplify that message, explain to people how they can also help. And then if you are like some of these small businesses that have had to completely shutter at this time and just hold, it's okay to just send a simple message out, thanking people for their patronage, and then telling them that you'll be back and using this time to really come back with a vengeance.
Perfect. We know a lot of businesses are being pushed online right now at a speed they might not have planned for. So thank you, Artie. Those are some really great actionable tips. I want to take it a little bit of a different direction right now. Rob, we've been keeping an eye out at Vistaprint for businesses that are doing some really great things right now. And as you know, most small businesses, they don't have a PR department like the one that you work in here. So can you tell us how small businesses can actively get some media coverage of how they're continuing to serve their community and how they've adapted? And how can they get that coverage to stay top of mind for when business starts to come back?
Yeah, absolutely. And although many small businesses won't have an in-house PR department or perhaps agency support, the good news is that we're seeing a lot of interest from the media, from journalists, in running stories about small business right now, and specifically, as you say, how they're adapting to the situation, also how they're giving back. I was just reading the BBC the other day, and there was a really interesting article where they profiled a few different local businesses, really sort of focusing on how these businesses have adapted their products and services to meet the sort of new needs of customers under quarantine. So one example was a local brewery company that basically introduced a can delivery service with contact-free delivery. Another was an arts and crafts manufacturer that created a take-home pottery and foam clay decorating kit. And there's really countless other examples like this amongst media outlets right now of how businesses are really sort of adapting and reinventing themselves during COVID-19. There are also lots of examples, perhaps more so in local media outlets, of how local small businesses are giving back to their communities, whether that's businesses that can create clothing or other essential items for NHS workers, restaurants that are able to donate meals, and other businesses that are able to really change their services so they can give back to people in need during this time. So there's definitely interest in all of these kinds of stories, and luckily small businesses have a lot of them at their fingertips. I would just recommend that when business owners contact journalists, that they take a really thoughtful approach during this time. You definitely need to be authentic and really sensitive to the situation. This is not a time to be pushing your products. It's not a time to be overly promotional about your own company, but it is a time to provide the media with information, with stories that are really informative, and also show how your business has been helpful and supportive during this time. So I would say, ask yourself a few questions when considering pitching a journalist. Is your story relevant? Is it appropriate right now? Does it show how your business is helping? And also, is it unique? Because there's a lot of journalists, a lot of businesses pitching journalists with COVID-19 related content right now. So you have to be relatively confident that it'll be able to stand out amongst the other stories. If you feel like your story, like your pivot or your sort of giving back initiative does kind of meet this criteria, then really the next step is to pull together a short email pitch that really just quickly summarizes your story. And within this, you'll have a subject header that basically tells the journalist what your story is about, ideally in 10 words or less, as sort of concisely as you possibly can. In that first sentence or that first paragraph, you're really building that headline and just summarize the key elements of your story, your top line, very briefly. In the second paragraph, you can provide a bit more detail and kind of like sort of explain the why behind your story. Why is your business pivoting in this way? Why are you supporting this particular initiative? And then finally, in the third paragraph, I think that's a nice place where you can include some facts and figures, some additional color. And to give you an example, there in the BBC article, the brewery company were able to include some figures on the number of pre-orders they received for their can delivery service within a 24-hour window. And it was quite an impressive figure. And journalists really love if you can be upfront about the success or impact of any initiative or any project you're working on. Once you've got your pitch, you'll want to include at the end just a brief bio explaining who you are, what your business does, as well as also offering up any video or any images that could support your story.
That's great. Thank you, Rob. I know that we know this is something that not a lot of small business owners have regular practice with. So those are some really great tips. Thank you. So let's talk now about another challenge. Business owners are having to make a lot of really big decisions right now in the ways of closures and significant shifts in their business. How do you communicate these big shifts externally, Artie?
So externally, you want to remember one very key thing. Whether you're representing yourself or your business, you're a human being trying to talk to another human being during a very trying time. So it's okay to take your time and really carve out what you want to say. But ultimately, if you can move forward with a message that is emotionally sensitive and empathetic and clear, those are really the key three things you need when trying to talk about your situation. As we previously discussed, businesses are trying to decide if they can stay their course as they had anticipated, if they need to pivot for community needs, or if they are needing to kind of stop in their tracks for just a short while before they can get back to their bigger plans. Whatever your decision you're making from an external perspective or internally with regard to your employees, everyone's feeling really vulnerable right now. So if you move forward with a message that is simple, clear, in a platform or on a social platform, whether it's via an email, on your website, Facebook, it doesn't matter where you're messaging as long as what you're messaging is true to you and to your business. So ultimately, emotional sensitivity, empathy, and clarity. Those are the three things you need to make a message that is going to be meaningful to not only the people that are involved in your business, but the people that patron your business. And then also just in general for your business to continue on its next path.
Absolutely. I think we can all agree on that. And definitely that sensitivity is essential right now. And that's not just externally. Rob, can you talk to us a little bit about what to keep in mind with those internal communications and what businesses should be thinking about when they're talking about these decisions to their employees?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree with what Artie said around the emotional sensitivity and the empathy. And I think, those two principles are equally applicable with internal communications when you have to share any potentially difficult decisions with your employees. Your employees, really what they're looking for right now is clear and consistent messaging, not only on how COVID-19 can impact their day-to-day, but also what might be coming next. And they are likely to be worried about job security, potentially seeing their hours reduced. But one important thing to remember is that your employees can also be your biggest advocates and your biggest influencers. If they're treated well and provided the right guidance, even during a really difficult decision, that can really help to steer your brand perception in a more positive direction. So if you do find yourself in a situation where you might have to, for instance, furlough employees or maybe reduce their hours, it's key to be really transparent and upfront of your staff about how these decisions are being made. So definitely provide the context around these changes and how they are really being driven by economic pressures due to COVID-19, which is really out of anyone's control. And this will just help to reassure employees that, these are not decisions being made as a result of performance, for instance. And then also make it clear to your employees that you've explored all the other options and you're not taking this decision lightly, but it's really a temporary measure and is required to avoid potentially more difficult decisions later on down the line. It's also really important, and this will depend a little bit on whichever country your employees are based in and where you're operating, but you definitely need to provide some clarity around what benefits will still be available for employees if they are put on furlough, and also any government support that might be available. So in the UK, for instance, the government is actually able to pay up to 80% of the wages of employees who are unable to work due to the pandemic. So that can avoid then any more difficult decisions later on down the line. So it's important that you're able to provide clear guidance around what help is available and how you can help your employees to access it. And then finally, you should definitely wrap up any communications about major changes with a more positive note around your company's long-term goals and how, while these changes may be unwelcome, they will ultimately help your company to reach your goals as a bigger team. And then definitely don't forget to express your gratitude for any sacrifices that employees may also need to make during these times, and make yourself available for any ongoing questions or support that employees may need.
That's great advice. Thank you, Rob. And on that more positive note, let's bring it back to some of those more positive pivots that we were talking about at the beginning, the changes that we've seen businesses make. Rob, let's take a moment to talk about something that we're doing right here at Vistaprint.
Awesome. Yeah. So our engineering and manufacturing teams based in our Windsor, Ontario plant recently optimized some existing machinery to develop a face shield product that really is designed to meet the growing needs of healthcare and frontline professionals. So this machine they use typically prints banners, but they're actually able to bypass the printing process and find a way to really efficiently and effectively print face shields, to produce face shields, sorry. And they expect to actually reach 100,000 units per week by the end of this month, which is just a fantastic achievement. We're actually also taking 100,000 of these shields and then donating them and distributing them amongst 100 healthcare facilities in underserved small communities throughout the US. And really, we're so proud to be able to support these communities and their frontline health workers in the fight against COVID-19.
Thanks, Rob. Yes, we're so proud of everyone who's worked so hard to make this happen. But I'm asking you about this not so much to highlight us, but I would love if you could talk a little bit about the bigger picture lesson here and what we should be keeping in mind.
Yeah, sure. So I think we definitely want to give back, but it's really key to be authentic and genuine in these acts. And as Vistaprint really wants to help all of our small business customers, health institutions, and other members of society as best we can, but in a way that really makes sense for our company. And we feel with this particular example of creating, producing, and donating shields, it makes a lot of sense. Like, we already had the technology and the people in place, and we were able to pivot and really quickly introduce this new product line. The team were really passionate and nimble and innovative, and we were able to really get this off the ground within days. But donation as well makes a lot of sense for us because we're specifically targeting healthcare facilities and smaller communities. And many of our small business customers are also based in these communities. So really, by giving back to these smaller hospitals, we're also helping to support our small business customers.
Thank you. So important to keep in mind. And I also want to note, Vistaprint is a fairly large company, but you don't have to be a huge corporation to make a difference with these kinds of things. Artie, can you help us get into some examples of other businesses who are being recognized for undertaking similar efforts?
Yes, and you are absolutely right. Small businesses are making a huge difference in their local communities on a daily basis. Rob gave a lot of lovely examples in the beginning of this conversation, but there are two that I think I just recently I wanted to highlight these because they show the scale of what small business really means. So small is a bit of a relative term depending on the industry that you're in and also the location. So I'm in the New York area, and before we had a mask shortage officially, Governor Cuomo put out some messages on social media warning of this situation, and a local designer, Christian Siriano, who compared to maybe Chanel or Gucci is a relatively small business, he would immediately responded and said, I have an entire staff and resources, fabric, message me and we will make this work. And so he volunteered immediately, seeing a need, a staff that was definitely available, and he was able to mobilize his employees in a way that was meaningful and effective for what he could provide. That's still a relatively bigger small business compared to a lot of people across the country. So I saw a news example yesterday, actually, in Tennessee. There was a nail salon who they had to close, obviously, due to the regulations and guidelines about quarantining and social distancing. However, there's this incredible photo of their entire staff in the nail salon. Instead of nail polish bottles, they were just all behind them. And in front, there was this giant line of seamstress tools, and everybody that was employed there volunteers 9 hours a day, every day in a work week to create masks and gowns for the local hospitals and for other frontline necessary employees in their local community. That is something that, to Rob's point earlier about mobilizing your employees, that's the perfect example of how if you empower your employees to help you during a time that everyone is struggling together, you can work together to really make an impactful influence over your local community and for your neighbors. So those are just two of a countless list of good news examples that have been popping up all over the media. People are really hunkering in together to make big changes and doing all the small things that help lead up to those big adjustments. So those are just two examples, but they kind of show you the breadth of a small business, and then also the willingness, no matter at what size you are a business, to want to help.
Those are amazing examples. Thank you, Artie. Love to hear those. So I think now is a great time to take it over to questions. I see that we have a few already, so I'll get us started with those. But please feel free to keep submitting those. Again, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you're joining us via Zoom. But if you're joining us via Facebook Live, you can type those questions right in there, and we'll also get those in the Q&A in Zoom. So I'll start us off with our first question, and Rob, would be great if you can take this one for us. So the question is, I'm very lucky that my business hasn't been impacted very much by this crisis. Would it be tone deaf for me to continue with the same messaging as I had before the crisis?
So I think, like, in this case, while you shouldn't go over the top, it's definitely best, even if you haven't been impacted by the crisis, to at least acknowledge the situation and the challenges that maybe some of your customers and other people in your community will be going through. And also, I would say, I mean, and this would depend a bit on what your communications were like pre-pandemic and the sort of tone you had, but I would definitely recommend toning down any overly promotional content, because I think, broadly speaking, that can be seen as quite insensitive at the moment. You know, people are looking for positive stories as well, and it's not all about COVID-19, although in the media, arguably, most of it is. But if you are sort of like sharing messages that aren't related to COVID-19, I would say you still want to avoid sort of being too lighthearted, and definitely avoid any words or phrases that could be misconstrued as insensitive. And also, one other point is that if you're a business that really hasn't been impacted by this, there's a good chance that you're running your business or your business can function entirely online. So there's actually a good opportunity for you to offer yourself up as an expert that could provide advice and guidance to other small businesses who maybe hadn't built a strong online presence before the pandemic and are really sort of crying out for tips and advice on how best to do this right now.
That's really great advice. Thank you, Rob. I think that would most likely be much appreciated by a lot of small business owners out there who don't have the experience with being online. Thank you. Artie, maybe you can take this next one for us. I'm trying to be very genuine with my message. Is it okay that I share with my customers the same messages that I've actually shared with my employees?
That's an interesting question. I would say yes, but with a caveat. Typically, your customers don't need to know as much information as your employees, and honestly, maybe they shouldn't. So you might want to be a little bit careful. We've been talking a lot about genuineness and transparency, authenticity, and messaging. That doesn't mean you have to tell everyone all of your business. So I think be cautious about what you're sharing and know that once it's publicly available information, you can't take it back. So if you want to be a little bit more cautious about what you're saying to the outside public versus your employees, I think that makes perfect sense. But if there are certain messages that align either way, sharing that publicly is absolutely your choice and you're right. And if it's comfortable for you, then go for it.
Great, thank you. Rob, this next one I think would be great for you, since you were talking a little bit earlier about getting the attention of reporters. How would I know if doing a press release is right for my business?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I guess I'd say up front, like not everything you have to share with the media has to be in a press release format. And I think often press releases used as kind of a word to describe any kind of media outreach. But the truth is that there's many different ways that you can get in touch with journalists. You need to lead into the medium that you're pitching. And in some cases that might mean providing photos, videos. It could just mean simply being available for live interviews. And sometimes just a simple sort of targeted and really personalized email will do the job. But there are definitely cases where press release can come in really helpful. Typically, they tend to be more detailed than an email pitch. They should give the whole unbiased story. And if written well enough and in the right way, a news outlet could technically take a press release and use it as it is with some minor tweaks once they've done some editing so it fits within their guidelines. There's also certain cases, certain sort of announcements that really lend themselves well to press releases. So for example, if you're launching a new product or service, if you're launching or if you're sharing some interesting research findings, if your company has received a really significant award or recognition, a big CSR initiative or sort of charitable donation, and also just in general, any major news to share that might be difficult to summarize in just like one paragraph. But I would say though, if you're looking to share something like your company's story, your company's pivot during COVID-19, I would say an email pitch is probably the better approach for that. Just really finding the types of journalists that write about these kinds of stories and just sending a really personalized pitch. And I would say that same approach would also work well if you're looking to share advice and tips, maybe on how your business handled COVID-19 and what you would recommend to other businesses in a similar situation.
Perfect, thank you. So it really just depends on what you're looking to share as to whether or not the press release is right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, thank you. So Rob, I'm actually going to stay with you for this one. This is coming in from Facebook Live. Can you create a bunch of products ready to order thanking people for supporting small businesses, like postcards, stickers, etc.? And we'll absolutely take any clarification to this question if you'd like to put anything more in. But I am going to assume that when the question says, can you create a bunch of products, they're asking from the perspective of, I'm a small business, can I create products like this?
So is the question whether a small business can create products offering support to the community?
I believe the question is, can the small business create products that people can order? And it's thanking people for supporting small businesses. So postcards, stickers, things like that are more thank you pieces.
Yeah, no, I think I've already seen some examples of small businesses producing similar products. And I think that's a great idea. I think right now, more than anything, small business owners need a lot of support from the public, and we should really be looking to sort of galvanize a movement around shopping small and around sort of shopping of local businesses. So I think that's a great idea, and I think your customers would really appreciate it.
Thank you. Our next question here, a very timely one. So Mother's Day is going to be here soon, and it's always a very good season for my business. Is it okay for me to be more promotional if I acknowledge the current situation, or would that be considered insensitive? Artie, can you take this one for us?
Sure. I think the way that question was phrased and who wrote it, I think there seems to be an underlying intent of emotional sensitivity just in the way that a question was phrased. So I would say you're starting on a good foot. Emotional sensitivity about what's going on is obviously something that we talked about previously. It is incredibly important, and it seems like it's top of mind for you, which is a great starting point. Ultimately, people want a little bit of joy during this time. a little bit of surprise and delight by sending your mother or your aunt or whoever is a mother figure to you that you're not with and can't be with. Zoom calls can only do so much. Emails can only do so much. Phone calls can only do so much. So ultimately, if a business is going to offer you, like me, a customer, a chance to give a little love and an extra bit of fun and joy to somebody I love on an important day, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I don't think anybody would fight you on wanting to promote that opportunity to spread some of that good news. I think people are going above and beyond to try to make things regular in an irregular world right now. And if your business is able to be part of that ecosystem of simply helping two people communicate together on a holiday that is all about love and relationships, I think go for it. There's a couple of caveats, and Rob mentioned this earlier, which is don't be overly promotional, about what you're doing. Obviously, no one wants a car salesman at this point. We want to be respectful, and you should, of course, acknowledge the circumstances of what's going on. Be mindful that, not everybody is going to be, your business isn't going to bounce back just because this period is good for you, as you may anticipate. But yeah, be cognizant of what's going on. Tell people that that you're with it, you're in it with them. But if you can offer some joy, I say go for it.
That's great. Totally agree. Thank you, Artie. Rob, maybe you can take this next one for us. I know you were talking a little earlier about how reporters are getting a lot of pitches having to do with COVID-19 now, and I think we're all seeing a lot of that as well. So this question is, I feel like I'm starting to sound repetitive with my COVID-19 messaging. Is it too soon to pivot away from that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. I think the answer really depends a little bit on where you and your customers are based and the stage you're at in terms of a pandemic and the lockdown. So I would say overall, taking a bit of a global view, it feels like it's definitely early to pivot away completely, but there's certainly new topics you can focus on, both outside the sort of COVID-19 space, but also still within it. So let's say you're in a country where your customers are in a country where restrictions are starting to lift, or are going to lift in a few weeks. I think that would be a good time to start talking about, any extra safety protocols that you're going to be taking when you reopen if you're a business of a physical storefront. It could also be a really good time to sort of share more positive messages, kind of encouraging people to shop small and shop local and sort of galvanize a bit of a movement around that. In terms of PR specifically and working with journalists, I do see some requests where they're actually looking for non-COVID-19 related content, but I would say they're a pretty small number within sort of like the pool of requests we see come in. But definitely it's a time where you could start sharing some lessons learned. Like, what have you learned as a business owner from COVID-19? How have you had to adapt? What have you learned from working at home for such a long time? Like, there's a lot of those kinds of like lessons learned and like tips and tricks type articles that you could be contributing to right now.
I love that. I think that's a great way to keep it still relevant, but to talk a little bit more about what you've learned and kind of new things that have come out of this. Thank you. Artie, I would love to have you take our next one here. Should I be using social media to address and respond to customer questions and complaints about shipping delays on my products due to COVID-19?
Yes. Yes, with a caveat. All of my answers have caveats. So customer service complaints on Twitter primarily have become kind of what people do with businesses on Twitter. So if you are a business on Twitter and you don't anticipate that, I'd say change your perspective. It's definitely going to come. But it also depends on two other things. One, is social media typically how you talk to your customers generally? And two, is it a platform where you're comfortable communicating how you're going to execute against the issues that they're bringing up? So for small businesses in particular, some of them live and breathe on social media. And if that's you, then of course, handle your business where your customers are in a place that you're comfortable, do what you got to do. But if you are a brick and mortar, if you are a larger small business, if you have a different type of customer base, social media may not be where you primarily talk to anyone. So if that's the case, you can use your social platforms to offer basic messaging about where people can go to talk to you about their pain points. So it's essentially like a short message that you can pin to the top of whatever social platform you're on and active on, and just notify people like, hey, if you need customer service help, if you need help with a shipping delay, if you need help because your product said it was delivered but you don't see it, those kinds of things we can handle via this email address or via this link on our website, fill out this form, et cetera, and then you can redirect people to communicate in a way that will, one, make them feel like they're not just shouting into a void. You know, everyone is, you know, you're doing it in a way that you can put them in a queue so that they can be helped. And then also, it's for you as a business owner, you're receiving information in a way that you can execute against. And that's really the thing that you want to make sure is happening. If you're seeing new pain points, if you're seeing repeat complaints, those are things that you know you need to work on. And if you're able to congregate them into one location, you may be able to make some larger decisions about how you can help more people faster. So yes, social media is a place where people like to complain. That's never going to not be a thing. So I would say pivot people away if it's not a place you're comfortable communicating. But if it is a place you're comfortable communicating, putting out a message generally saying, we know that there's a lot of stuff going on, acknowledging the trouble and the pain points, and then explicitly explaining one or two ways where you're looking to help alleviate burden on their end, or what you're doing to alleviate burden on an end on the business side to help ensure that they get what they need. That's all, I think, effective messaging as well.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And our next question is actually just a little bit more specific on that same exact topic. So I'm going to stick with you. This person is getting customer questions and complaints on their Facebook page particularly, but I really prefer to take these over email and over the phone. Should I post any response on my Facebook page, even if it's just to ask them to please call me instead?
Yeah, I think that's completely fine. Kind of just, it does build on what we were just discussing, which is talk to people in a place where you know you can help them. If Facebook public messaging or direct messaging isn't going to be your way to ensure that somebody who has a request has their request met, it is 100% not only a good thing to do, but probably the most effective thing to do for you is to message them, say, this is exactly where you need to give me the information about what's going on, and I will either speak to you, in this case it's a phone call, or if it's an email address or what have you, a chatbot widget on your website. You know, I've used all three, and this is like a personal aside, but I've been dealing with this myself, just like everybody else. Even there are certain airlines that don't want to give you your money back. Like, that happens. I followed all the steps. Then I had to punt to social media because none of my steps were getting responses. And then they redirected me. I talked to them and explained to them I did all of the things. And then they said, okay, we'll get back to you. I mean, sometimes that's how it is, but that's a big business. For smaller businesses, you have a lot more direct communication with your customers anyway. So you're in a perfect position to say, hey, give me a call, let's work this out, as opposed to saying, you know, you should message me here and then you know, it's okay. If a small message to a person saying, I understand that you're frustrated. I understand that this is, you know, an annoyance. I'm working my best to make this work. I need 3 more pieces of information. Why don't you give me a call and let's work it out?
That's perfect. Thank you. Rob, let's turn it over to you here for this question. I want to reach out to reporters to try to get them to do a story on my business, but I don't know where to start looking for their contact information. How do I find out where to send an email to get in touch with my local news outlets?
So if it's local news outlets specifically, or really any smaller publications, so like a trade magazine, typically most of the contact details should be somewhere on a website. It's not always easy to find, but there should be like an editorial staff section. If that's still not possible, then I'd recommend going onto a website. Once you know what kind of story you're looking to pitch, go onto a website or look in the local paper, find out who's writing the kinds of stories that you're looking to pitch, and then pretty much all journalists are very active on Twitter, so you can probably find them through Twitter. And then assuming they're a journalist that's open to being pitched, they would then probably have their contact details on their Twitter profile. There are also paid services such as Gorkana and Cision, which are basically like big media databases, but as far as I'm aware, they don't offer any free services. So that might be an issue for some businesses. But in general, I'd say most of the contacts you can get are probably either going to be on the website in the case of a smaller publication, or in a bigger publication, you should be able to track down the journalists through Twitter.
Perfect, thank you. So you do recommend tracking down a particular journalist then?
Absolutely. I think one of the most important things with pitch with media relations is being as personalized as possible. And you can have a great story, but there's going to be probably like one key contact, or maybe if in bigger publications a few key contacts, but there's going to be sort of like that one key contact who's going to be most interested in your story. So you can get much better results if you actually take some time and really research who the best journalists are to receive your press release or your pitch, rather than trying to like sort of push it out to a large number of contacts. It's definitely best to be a lot more personalized rather than sort of go wide and potentially be seen as being a bit spammy.
That's great, thank you. I think good general advice as well.
Yeah.
Right, so Artie, I would love if you can take this next one here. My business is temporarily closed and I haven't been able to reinvent myself and pivot yet, but I do want to stay in touch with my customers during the crisis. I'm just not sure what I should be talking about. Do you have suggestions on the type of messaging I should focus on?
That's interesting. If you're a business and you need to close, the first thing you'd obviously message is about, what prompted this. Obviously, COVID is probably what prompted this, but making that statement publicly at least gives you an avenue to continue a conversation with your customers. Small businesses are extra lovely just because they want to be in constant communication with their customers. It's part of the joy of being that small. You really get to know these people, especially if they're repeat customers. So I can understand the desire to want to stay in constant communication, or at least in some regulated communication during a time. But if you don't have any substantive news, I would caution you against just messaging people for the sake of it. I think we all can remember some point in the third week of March when we got emails from people and companies that we forgot existed because everyone sent a COVID message. That is a universal truth that we all experienced and no one liked it. That's the other half of that universal truth. So I think message when you have something to say, but I think maybe going back to something, if you want to stay in communication, and let's say, I don't know what type of small business this individual has, but if you're integrated into your either online community or your real life community, you could always use your kind of pulpit, as we talked about very early on in this conversation, to really hark back to what's going on in everyone's life. So if there is a donation or a charitable service that you're working with just personally, you can talk about that. You can amplify local news stories about what other small businesses in your area are doing during this time to help with relief efforts. You can also talk about what you personally are planning to do from like a neighbor perspective, during this time to donate what you can. You can also offer advice. Let's say you're a small business that has a service to offer that cannot be fulfilled right now, but you know that your best friend is a small business that's a restaurant. Maybe encourage people on your platforms to also patron those types of locations that are still open. So as a small business, you're still part of a larger community of other small businesses. So even if you're not making news right now, you still have an opportunity to help amplify the work efforts of not just people in your community, literally saving lives, but also people in your community that are trying to give the basics to everyone else. And so those could be potential options. I think carefully before you decide to just message people. Maybe parse it out, maybe bundle some information together, maybe make it like a newsletter or like a check-in or something like that. I think giving it a framework also will help you anchor what you need to say, and it will also give it a little bit more substance. So it's amazing that owners want to keep in touch with customers, but sometimes less is more.
Yes, thank you. I totally agree. And I love the idea of if you don't have something substantive to share right now, to really encourage your community to be patrons of other businesses that are open right now. I think that's an amazing idea. So I just want to do a really quick time check here. We are coming up towards the end of the time. So if you do have a question, now is the time to get that in. I do see that we have one more right now, so we'll take that. But if there are any other questions, definitely submit those right now. So, Rob, maybe you can take this last one that we have right here. I'm trying to be very careful with my messaging, but I'm still worried that I'm going to sound insensitive. Do you have tips that you can share on what we should and should not say during a crisis? So any do's and don'ts?
Yeah, so I think like one kind of do that I think could apply to a lot of small businesses is generally trying to adopt a really helpful and hopeful tone across your messaging. I don't think you can really go wrong with that. In terms of don'ts, I think it's best to kind of avoid too much humor or maybe an overly casual tone. Like for some brands, that tone works really well, but we're in sort of like sort of different circumstances right now, and you definitely don't want to appear like you're being dismissive of the crisis at all. I would say if you're in a business that's still operating as normal, this is definitely a time when you want to kind of position yourself as being really supportive. So let's say you run a business that sells online courses, you should definitely look to provide tips and advice to customers on maybe how they could study more effectively at home. What I would advise against though is kind of like heavily promoting your services. Even if you're still essentially able to function as you were before, you don't want to sort of like come across as too salesy and maybe include messages about people having more time or you sort of like using their free time to use your services, because firstly, that's not going to be the case for everyone. And secondly, it just might seem like very dismissive of the situation. And sort of linked to that, I would say it's definitely worth avoiding like any urgent messages in your offers or your copy. So sort of words like don't miss out or book now. And I would generally just advise sort of a less promotional tone throughout any sales content. And then in general, sort of like a last point to remember before you send anything out, it's just worth like really reviewing any copy carefully and checking that no insensitive wording might have slipped in. And this can happen to the best of us, but you definitely would want to watch out for any words or like terms related to health or checkup or spread, gather, event, just anything that could be misconstrued as sort of insensitive.
Great advice, thank you. So I don't see any further questions coming in. I'm going to close this one out for today, but we are going to be hosting these discussions twice a week on various relevant topics. You can join us every Tuesday and Thursday at noon. And we definitely want your help for picking these topics. We want to be sure that they are helpful and that they're really things that everybody needs to hear right now. So please be sure to fill out the survey at the end and let us know what you'd like to hear. You can also send any questions that you have to homeofficehours@vistaprint.com. The address is up there on the slide right now. And you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram to stay up to date on the episodes we have coming up, and absolutely comment there as well if there are other topics that you would like to hear. You can tune back in next Tuesday at noon. We're going to be talking about taking effective photography from your home. So before we go, I would like to ask our panelists for their number one final thought from today's conversation. Rob, can you start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's a really challenging time for all, but we're all going to remember the businesses, the organizations, and the people who did anything that made our lives easier during these months. So I think just being helpful and compassionate rather than being overly promotional and pushy will ensure that people remember you and talk about you in the right way as we move out of this pandemic.
Great, thank you. Artie, how about you?
I think whether you're a big or small business, clear communication is always going to be your business best friend. Crisis responses are going to look different for every business. So it's really up to you to do your best to stay the course that's right for you. But I would highly encourage that you lead with empathy because it's really going to make the difference for your customers and for your employees.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Artie, so much for taking the time to be with us today. We really appreciate it. And thank you to the audience for your curiosity and your time and your questions. We will see you next week. This has been Home Office Hours Live with Vistaprint. We'll talk to you soon.